My name is Molly Watts. I'm 34 years old. I carry a massive scar just below my collarbone and a blown-out knee from multiple combat deployments in Syria. But that physical pain is nothing compared to the moment I stood inside my own brother's wedding tent in Charleston. I had just landed from a long deployment wearing my best dress to celebrate. Instead, the first thing I walked into was my future sister-in-law Vanessa, standing in a circle of relatives deliberately raising her voice to mock me behind my back. "Women like her never make anything of themselves," she sneered. "She's probably just hoping to marry some officer so she can latch onto his pension." The crowd laughed, and my own flesh and blood, my brother standing right next to her, just looked the other way. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to like and subscribe to the channel. But only if this story hits home for you. And let me know in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it there right now. Watch how I took my dignity back. The laughter hit like shrapnel. The humid Charleston air inside the tent was thick, heavy with the sickeningly sweet stench of imported white roses and the faint underlying reek of diesel exhaust blowing in from the harbor. Vanessa stood dead center of the crowd. Her cream linen dress was perfectly pressed. A crystal flute of overpriced champagne dangled from her fingers. She had fired that insult from a perfect blind spot, surrounded by an echo chamber of gossiping aunts and cousins. I didn't flinch. My hands gripped a glass of iced lemon water. My palms were a map of thick calluses from fast roping out of helicopters and gripping standard-issue rifles. The condensation on the glass chilled my skin. Deep inside my left knee, a dull grinding ache flared up, a permanent souvenir from an IED blast, aggravated by the cramped flight out of Naval Station Norfolk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the table and flip it. Instead, I locked my jaw. Years of military discipline kicked in, forcing my heart rate down to a slow, methodical thump. My eyes bypassed Vanessa entirely. I tracked straight to Ben, my own brother, the groom. He was standing right there, fully within earshot. He saw my face. He heard every single word his fiancée said. His reaction. He shifted his weight, raised his craft IPA, and took a massive gulp, staring intently at the string lights above as if they were the most fascinating thing in the world. Coward. I looked away from him and scanned the obnoxious luxury of the tent. Silk table runners spilling over the edges. Expensive catering staff carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. None of these people spraying themselves with French perfume and giggling at my expense had a clue. They didn't know the price tag on this circus. I had missed 10 straight Thanksgiving dinners for this family. I had spent holidays chewing on dry, chalky MREs inside windowless concrete bunkers in the Middle East. I hoarded every dime of my hazard pay. That money wasn't just a paycheck. It was soaked in the smell of cordite sweat and constant paranoia. And here they were, taking the $40,000 I'd wired to save Ben's failing roofing business, funneling it into this bloated spectacle, and treating me like the punchline to a cheap joke. I turned my back on their giggling. I needed distance. Walking toward the center banquet tables, my eyes dropped to the seating chart. It was a minefield of heavy gold-rimmed place cards. Emily's side of the family got the absolute royal treatment. Dr. Arthur Reed, Thomas Miller, Esquire. The titles were printed, bold and proud. I followed the edge of the table, running a finger along the linen. Tucked away in the far corner, deliberately hidden behind an oversized, obnoxious floral centerpiece, I found my spot. The card was painfully bare. Just 2 words printed on cheap stock. Molly Watts. Empty. No rank. No commander, not even a courtesy title. Just a complete calculated erasure of who I was. This wasn't a typo. You don't just forget the rank of an active-duty naval intelligence officer. This was a silent, direct order from the family chain of command. Hide the successful daughter. Keep her invisible. Shrink her down so she doesn't cast a shadow over the golden boy who couldn't even keep a small-town roofing company out of the red. A sharp, bony elbow jammed hard into my forearm. Vanessa brushed past me, a sour look on her perfectly contoured face. "Move out of the way." She smirked, her voice dropping into a low, venomous hiss meant only for me. Family is trying to get things done. The impact knocked my glass. Ice water sloshed over the rim, splashing directly onto the back of my hand and dripping down the sleeve of my dress. Her little squad of bridesmaids trailed behind her, shooting me sideways glances, waiting for the explosion. They wanted a reaction. They wanted the unstable military sister to break down and cause a scene so they could justify leaving me out in the cold. I didn't give them a damn thing. I reached over, pulled a single white paper napkin from the table, and slowly, methodically wiped the freezing water off my knuckles. Every single drop. I balled up the napkin and dropped it onto Vanessa's empty chair. Then I picked up that insulting, nameless place card. I folded it once and shoved it deep into the pocket of my coat. My lips curled into a cold, dead smile. I didn't light the match for this war. But I was absolutely going to be the one to burn this tent to the ground. Inside my pocket, my thumb dragged across the raised, rough ink of my last name on the card. Watts. The friction against my skin didn't ground me in the present. It dragged me kicking and screaming straight back to the smell of burnt grease in my mother's kitchen 15 years ago. My thumb rubbed across the raised ink of the name card hidden deep inside my coat pocket. Watts. That name never felt like a shield. It felt like a heavy rusted chain. The rough texture of the paper melted away under my skin, instantly replaced by the suffocating smell of burnt bacon grease and stale cigarette smoke. 15 years ago. I was on my hands and knees on the cracked linoleum of my mother's kitchen. Ben had just backed my dad's Ford F-150 into a concrete light pole because he was too busy showing off for his buddies. But I was the one holding the scrub brush, wiping muddy footprints off the floor. My mother stood over me, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "You should have stopped him," she said. That was the rule in the Watts house. Ben broke things. I cleaned them up. When he barely scraped through high school with a straight line of C- grades, my parents threw the biggest backyard barbecue the neighborhood had ever seen. The grill was piled high with burgers. Everyone cheered. 2 years later, I walked into that same greasy kitchen holding a thick, heavy envelope. College acceptance, full admission. I placed it on the counter. My mother did not even open it. She just slid it right back toward me. "The savings have to go to Ben's roofing company," she said. Her voice was flat, completely devoid of a single ounce of apology. "You are on your own." It was not a mistake. It was a system. A perfectly engineered machine designed to keep Ben at the center of the universe, no matter how many times he fell flat on his face. He started a roofing business. It bled money from day one. I remember the sour smell of rotting pine boards and damp shingles piled up in our driveway. Instead of telling him to get a real job, my parents marched straight down to the bank. They took out a second mortgage on their house just to cover his bad debts. I stood in the dark hallway, watching them pull him into a tight hug. I watched them wipe his tears. In their eyes, a man failing was just a victim of a bad economy. A woman succeeding was just misplaced, unnatural ambition. They did not beat me. They did not lock me in a closet. They did something much worse. They starved me out. They looked right through me with a cold, blank indifference that slowly stripped away my self-worth. They planted a toxic, heavy seed right behind my ribs, the belief that I was never going to be good enough to earn unconditional love. The sharp clink of a fork against crystal yanked me out of the dark. The wedding tent came back into focus. I was sitting at a round table, the white linen blinding under the chandelier. Across from me sat Colonel Mercer, an old, grizzled veteran with a thick white mustache and a chest full of invisible ghosts. He let out a loud, raspy laugh, slamming his heavy, scarred hand on the table. "So," the colonel boomed, looking right at me, "is it true the commander spends her days bossing around a bunch of meathead Marines?" I took a slow sip of my ice water. I kept my voice low, dropping the pitch just enough to command the space. "Only when they need adult supervision, Colonel." A wave of genuine laughter rippled across our end of the table. But at the head of the table, the noise died. Ben stopped chewing, his jaw locked. He stared down at his plate, his grip on his knife tightening until his knuckles turned bone white. I recognized that look. It was the frantic, hateful glare of a small man who suddenly realized he was the weakest person in the room. He cleared his throat. A loud scraping sound that dragged like sandpaper across the conversation. He was going to put me back in my place. He had to. "Come on now," Ben sneered. He stabbed his fork violently into a charred piece of steak. The meat oozed a dark, bitter juice onto his porcelain plate. "I thought most of your work was at a desk." There are no bombs or bullets over there to brag about, just paperwork. The ambient noise in the tent dropped dead. Vanessa, sitting glued to his side, covered her mouth to hide a vicious little giggle. I did not blink. I sat perfectly still, my spine rigid against the back of the wooden chair. Ben had just weaponized our mother's exact tone. With 3 sentences, he took my combat medals, the shrapnel buried in my knee, the blood I scrubbed off my boots, and threw them all into the garbage. To his new wife and her friends, I was just a glorified secretary playing dress-up in a uniform. If you have ever been the invisible child in your family, the one whose sacrifices were swept under the rug to protect a golden child, you know exactly how heavy the air in that room felt. Hit the like button and subscribe right now if you are standing with me. And do me a favor. Go down to the comments and type the word invisible. Let me know I am not the only one who had to fight for basic respect in my own home. I stared directly into his shifty, lying eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself to a man who had never seen the dark side of a combat zone. He thought I was just sitting behind a desk. He had absolutely no idea what kind of monster he had just woken up. The memory of real blood, real sacrifice, and a 2 a.m. phone call began to surge through my veins like freezing ice water. Desk job. 2 words. They rang in my ears like a cheap insult spat from a coward's mouth. I looked down at my hands resting on the white linen tablecloth. My thumb traced the thick, jagged scar tissue snaking up my left wrist, disappearing under the cuff of my dress. At 22, I signed a piece of paper to escape the suffocating prison of my parents' house. Ben called me a coward, said I was running away from real life. He had absolutely no idea what my desk actually looked like. My desk was the hard-packed, sun-baked dirt of a Syrian combat zone. It was the deafening, bone-rattling crack of an IED detonating directly under the right-side tires of our Humvee. I remember the stomach-dropping sensation of a 7-ton armored truck lifting completely off the ground. The violent, teeth-shattering impact when it slammed back down into the crater. The blinding cloud of pulverized concrete, diesel fumes, and dust. The heavy, warm, metallic taste of my own blood in the back of my throat. While Ben was back home complaining about the afternoon heat on a residential roof, I was kneeling in the dirt, my hands slick with arterial spray, jamming combat gauze into a young Marine's torn neck, while rounds chewed up the brick wall 3 feet above my head. I crawled out of that hellhole with a blown knee, a permanent ringing in my left ear, and a combat action ribbon. I built my worth from the ground up in places these people sitting around this tent could not even point to on a map. They were never there when the dust settled. They never saw the nightmares. But they always knew exactly how to find me when the bank accounts ran dry. 4 years ago, 2:13 a.m. East Coast time. I was lying flat on my back on a cheap sagging mattress in a transient barracks right after a brutal deployment. I was bone tired. The kind of heavy dragging exhaustion that aches deep in your marrow. The phone on the nightstand vibrated violently against the cheap laminate wood. It was Ben. When I answered, there was no arrogant swagger. Just the pathetic, wet sound of a grown man sobbing into the receiver. His voice cracked. He was in a full-blown panic. The bank had frozen his commercial lines of credit. 2 of his supply checks had bounced. His roofing crew was threatening to walk off the job and rip the tarps off a half-finished house if they did not get paid by Friday. Mom and Dad had already drained the equity out of their house, trying to float his bad decisions. They had nothing left to give him. He was drowning. He begged me for a lifeline. He swore up and down, crying through the phone, that he would pay me back the second the business turned a profit. I sat up in the pitch-black room. The only light was the harsh blue glare of my banking app reflecting off my face. My skin was still carrying a layer of fine grit I had not been able to completely scrub off in the communal showers. I stared at the balance on the screen. $40,000. That was not just a number. That was pure hazard pay. Combat deployments. Months of sleeping with my boots on. That money was my escape hatch. It was supposed to be the down payment on a small, quiet house of my own. A place where nobody could ever make me feel small again. I ground my teeth together, my jaw aching from the tension. I tapped the screen. I wired the entire $40,000 into his account before the sun even came up. I told him to pay his crew first. To keep the lights on. I did it because I thought that is what blood does. I threw away the down payment on my own peace of mind just to protect his fragile ego from the humiliation of bankruptcy. Back in the wedding tent, the ambient noise rushed back into my head. The clinking of silver knives against porcelain plates, the low hum of meaningless polite small talk. I looked across the table. Ben had just finished cutting another piece of his steak. He shoved it into his mouth, chewing aggressively, washing it down with another massive swallow of beer. He did not even glance in my direction. The man who had literally wept on the phone begging me to save him from absolute financial ruin 4 years ago was now sitting 3 feet away using that exact same mouth to humiliate me in front of his new snobby in-laws. He took my $40,000 to survive, and now he was taking my dignity to impress Vanessa. The exhaustion and loneliness I'd carried for 15 years vanished. It did not turn into a fiery, screaming rage. It froze. It solidified into a heavy block of cold steel right behind my ribs. The kind of absolute calculated clarity that only comes right before you pull a trigger. I did not sigh. I did not shake my head in disbelief. I set my silver fork down on the edge of the plate, dead silent. I pushed my wooden chair back across the carpet, the movement slow and controlled. I stood up. My spine was perfectly straight, my shoulders squared. I was not running away. I was simply leaving the kill zone. I needed to step outside into the damp evening air. I needed a quiet space to load my weapon. I leaned against the damp wooden railing of the patio. The Charleston harbor breeze carried the smell of low tide and stale spilled beer from the outdoor bar. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The screen lit up the dark corner. A text from Dana, my old unit medic, was waiting for me. "Remember who you are, Molly." I locked the screen. I needed that. A quick, sharp hit of oxygen in a highly toxic environment. The wooden deck boards groaned, high heels clicking hard and fast. Vanessa. She brought 2 of her bridesmaids out into the humid night air with her carrying their half-empty glasses of Pinot. They did not see me standing in the shadows. Or maybe they did, and they just did not care. "She is harmless, honestly." Vanessa's voice carried over the patio, shrill and dripping with fake pity. Women like her never actually build anything. They just take orders their whole lives. No real ambition. It is sad. I did not move a muscle. I just watched her. Then the air shifted. It was not a sound at first. It was a physical presence. Heavy measured footsteps hit the wooden deck. Leather heels striking the boards with absolute calibrated purpose. Thud. 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 The obnoxious jazz music bleeding out from the main tent suddenly felt like meaningless static. A massive figure parted the small crowd by the outdoor bar. Close-cropped silver-white hair. Shoulders as wide as a doorframe. General Thomas Hale, Emily's father. 4-star Marine Corps commander. His eyes were scanning the porch. Radar pinging. Target locked. He stopped 3 feet away from me. He lowered his champagne flute. The relaxed, friendly father of the bride exterior vanished instantly. His posture snapped rigid. Vanessa panicked. She saw the most important man at the wedding walking toward our corner, and her narcissistic brain could not handle not being the center of attention. She stepped right into his path, flashing a blinding, perfectly practiced smile. "Oh, General Hale," she cooed, reaching a hand out to touch his arm. "Do you two know each?" He did not look at her. He did not acknowledge her voice. He did not even break his stride. General Hale simply stepped around Vanessa like she was a piece of misplaced patio furniture. He erased her existence with zero effort. Vanessa's hand hovered in the empty air. Her smile cracked, fracturing into genuine shock. The general stopped right in front of me. His eyes were dark, intense, carving right through the cheap plastic drama of the wedding. His voice was low, thick with gravel. "Commander Watts." Every conversation on the porch died. Total silence. I straightened my spine. I brought my heels together. The muscle memory took over. "General Hale." He did not offer a polite wave. He reached out. His massive scarred hand engulfed mine. The grip was tight, rough, with old calluses. 2 soldiers. It was a heavy grounding anchor in a sea of absolute nonsense. "I cannot believe it," he muttered, his voice actually cracking for a fraction of a second. "Nobody told me." The sliding glass door rattled open. Ben stumbled out onto the patio, his tie loosened, a fresh IPA in his hand. He saw his new father-in-law gripping my hand. Confusion washed over his flushed face. He jogged over, trying to play the big, welcoming host. "Hey, Tom," Ben stammered, using the general's first name, like they were old drinking buddies. "Everything good out here, Molly giving you trouble." General Hale slowly turned his head. He looked at Ben. It was the kind of look a sniper gives a target right before pulling the trigger. Cold, clinical, disgusted. "Trouble," Hale repeated. The word hung in the damp air, heavy as lead. Hale let go of my hand and turned his full, terrifying attention onto my brother. "Your sister pulled my boy out of the fire, son." Ben blinked, his mouth falling slightly open. "What?" Mason Hale barked, his voice rising just enough to make Ben physically flinch. 2 years ago, outside Raqqa, Mason's unit was pinned down. Commander Watts authorized the danger close artillery strike. She directed the medevac while taking heavy sustained fire. She brought my son back to me. Emily, the bride, had stepped out onto the porch just in time to hear it. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide. The bridesmaids turned and stared at me. The blood drained completely out of Ben's face. He looked at me, then back at the general. He was sweating. Cold, greasy sweat gathering at his hairline. The man who had begged me for $40,000 to save his pathetic business had absolutely no idea that I pulled bleeding Marines out of the dirt for a living. He had never once bothered to ask. General Hale saw the blank, stupid look on Ben's face. The general set his glass down on the wooden railing with a sharp, violent clack. "Why wasn't I told Commander Watts was attending?" Hale demanded, his eyes boring holes into Ben's skull. "Why is her rank not on her table card? You did not know who your own sister is." Ben opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He looked exactly like what he was, a cornered rat. General Hale did not wait for an excuse. He had seen enough. He looked back at me, his expression softening just a fraction, returning to that absolute, unbreakable military respect. He gave me a single firm nod. "Outstanding service, Commander." He turned on his heel and walked back into the tent. The sliding door clicked shut behind him. The silence on the porch was deafening. The hierarchy had just been violently reset. The outside world had just walked in and handed me the ultimate validation, exposing my own blood family as ignorant, ungrateful frauds. Ben stood there completely neutered in front of his new wife's friends. He stared at his leather shoes, entirely stripped of his false pride. I did not gloat. I did not say a single word to him. I picked up my water glass and took a slow drink. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Vanessa had retreated to the far edge of the porch, half hidden behind a large potted fern. Her face was dark, twisted with pure, toxic humiliation. She was not looking at Ben. She was glaring directly at me. I watched her lean in close to her maid of honor, her hand covering her mouth as she whispered something frantic. She was bleeding out socially. And narcissists do not just surrender when they bleed. They look for a knife. The ambush was coming. I knew exactly when it would happen. Tomorrow morning. The family brunch, 6 in the morning. The Charleston sky was a flat, bruised gray. A cold, steady drizzle hit the hotel room window, smearing the glass. My internal military clock woke me up before the alarm even had a chance to try. I pulled on a heavy black turtleneck sweater, slipped into dark jeans. I ran my hands down the fabric, smoothing out the invisible creases. I needed the armor today. My phone lit up on the nightstand. Another text from Dana. "They judge you before you even open your mouth. It means they are terrified of you." I snapped the phone shut. I took one long, slow breath through my nose. The validation from General Hale last night was a massive hit of adrenaline, but it did not cure the disease. A public dressing down by a 4-star general does not magically fix a toxic family. It just makes them regroup. They pull their heads back into their shells, waiting for the exact right moment to take a blindside bite. They were not going to apologize. They were going to double down. I was not walking down to a post-wedding family brunch this morning to catch up and eat burnt bacon. I was walking back into a combat zone. The hotel dining room was thick with tension. It was a suffocating heavy air. The second I pushed the glass double doors open, the low chatter died off. Vanessa was holding court right in the center of the room. She was flanked by her hungover bridesmaids, nursing cups of black coffee. Ben sat slouched in the chair next to her. The dark sunken bags under his eyes looked like bruises. Even from 15 feet away, I could smell the sour, stale reek of cheap draft beer sweating out of his pores. He looked completely defeated. But Vanessa was wide awake, practically vibrating with nervous, hateful energy. She needed to reclaim the territory she lost on the patio last night. I walked toward the buffet line. I did not look at them. I just kept my face blank, my posture straight. Vanessa stirred her tea. The metal spoon clinked aggressively against the ceramic cup. She did not look at me either. She just pitched her voice perfectly. Loud enough for her bridesmaids. Loud enough for the aunts at the next table. And exactly loud enough for me to hear every single word. I just think it is sad, Vanessa murmured, a fake pitying smile plastered on her face. Some people make their rank their entire personality. I mean, it is a wedding. It is supposed to be about family and love. Not a place to show off your resume to strangers just to get a pat on the back. Two of the older aunts at the adjacent table gave slow, knowing nods. The bridesmaids smirked into their coffee cups. Classic pack tactics. The Southern passive-aggressive strike. Isolate the target. Paint the target as the aggressor. Play the victim. I did not break my stride. I picked up a small white plate. I reached over with the silver tongs and picked up a single warm buttermilk biscuit. I walked over to the empty chair directly across from Ben and Vanessa. I pulled the chair out. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the tile floor. I sat down. I kept my back perfectly straight, my shoulders squared. I did not say a word. I picked up a butter knife. I scooped a small pat of butter. I slowly, methodically dragged the dull metal blade across the rough, flaky top of the biscuit. Scrape. I did it again. Smooth. Even. Deliberate. The sheer, absolute silence radiating from my side of the table hit them like a physical weight. The smirk slowly melted off Vanessa's face. The bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly finding the bottom of their coffee cups fascinating. Silence is a weapon. When you do not react, when you refuse to give a narcissist the screaming match they are begging for, they start to suffocate on their own poison. Vanessa's eyes darted nervously. She shifted her weight, opening her mouth to try and fill the dead air with another veiled insult. I set the butter knife down on the edge of the plate. It made a sharp, clean clink. I looked up. My eyes bypassed Vanessa entirely. I locked onto Ben's hollow, bloodshot eyes. He tried to look down at his plate of scrambled eggs, but I did not let him go. I pinned him down with a dead, unblinking stare. Then I slowly shifted my gaze to Vanessa. I took a bite of the biscuit. I chewed it slowly, swallowed. When I finally spoke, my voice was dead level. No anger, no shaking. Just absolute freezing cold fact. It is funny. I said the words, cutting right through the stale air. I always thought that if you were actually family with someone, you would at least know what they did for a living. The spoon in Vanessa's teacup stopped moving. Her mouth fell open a fraction of an inch, the fake smile completely shattered. Ben lowered his head closer to his plate. His Adam's apple jerked up and down as he swallowed nothing. He did not say a word to defend his wife. He did not say a word to defend himself. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to scream. I took the very blade she tried to stab me with and drove it straight into the rotting core of the Watts family dynamic. Their profound willful ignorance was out on the table for everyone to look at. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip of the bitter black liquid. I kept my eyes locked right on Vanessa. She abruptly pushed her chair back, the legs screeching against the floor, and stormed out of the dining room without looking back. Ben just sat there staring into his cold eggs. I had won the morning. But as I set my coffee cup down, the adrenaline began to fade. The reality of what I was doing hit me. I was sitting at a table with my own flesh and blood, treating them like enemy combatants. I stood up, leaving the half-eaten biscuit on the plate. I walked out of the dining room, heading straight for the elevator. The armor was starting to crack. The heavy hotel room door slammed shut. The deadbolt engaged with a hard, metallic click. I stood in the dead silence of the entryway. For the last 6 hours, I had held the line. I'd kept my spine straight. I'd absorbed every passive-aggressive strike at the breakfast table. But the second I was alone, the iron armor completely fractured. My knees hit the cold porcelain tile of the bathroom floor. I pressed my calloused hands over my face, the rough skin scraping against my cheekbones. A harsh, ugly sob ripped out of my throat. The sound echoed off the sterile white walls. I was not crying over Vanessa. Her cheap insults meant absolutely nothing to me. I was crying over the brutal, suffocating truth of the situation. I had spent 12 years of my life bleeding in foreign dirt to protect people I did not even know. I had dragged wounded men out of burning vehicles. Yet here I was, crawling on a hotel bathroom floor, starving for a single ounce of basic human respect from the people who shared my own blood. My family was not a safe harbor. They were the most hostile combat zone I had ever walked into. I dropped my hands. I looked up at the mirror above the sink. Hot tears cut a path right through the thick red scar tissue snaking across my collarbone. A few silver hairs caught the harsh fluorescent bathroom light. My phone vibrated on the marble counter. I reached for it. It was a text message from Dana. "You do not owe them a performance." The screen went dark. I stared at my own reflection in the glass. Retreating meant they won. It meant validating every lie they told themselves to feel superior to me. I stood up. I reached for the chrome faucet and cranked it all the way to the right. I cupped my hands and threw freezing cold water directly into my face. The shock hit my nervous system, instantly killing the panic. I grabbed a rough cotton towel, dried my skin violently, and pulled my hair back into a tight, severe knot at the base of my neck. I was done bleeding for them. Tonight I was going completely on the offensive. The evening reception was drowning in warm yellow ambient light. Hundreds of guests crowded the main ballroom. The air smelled like roasted prime rib, expensive bourbon, and melting candle wax. I walked straight past the open bar and poured myself a cup of black, unsweetened coffee from the catering urn. The thick ceramic cup warmed my cold palms. Through the dense crowd, I spotted Vanessa. She was holding a large glass of red wine, holding court with a fresh batch of out-of-town relatives near the back of the room. I walked up quietly, standing just outside her peripheral vision. Molly is always at work. Vanessa sighed, swirling her dark wine. Her entire life is just barking orders and following protocols. It is a lonely way to live. She is just so emotionally starved. The relatives murmured in sympathetic agreement. It was the ultimate pathetic weapon insecure women used against independent ones. If you do not need their validation or a man's wallet, you must be broken inside. They use the illusion of a strong, lonely woman to justify their own complete lack of substance. I stepped directly into the light. I set my coffee cup down on the high-top table next to her. The ceramic base hit the wood with a dull, heavy thud. The relatives froze mid-sip. Vanessa stiffened. Her eyes darted away for a fraction of a second before she tried to paste on that sickeningly sweet, fake smile. I looked right through her. "It is funny," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the upbeat jazz music playing in the background. For decades, people have used those exact same words to describe men who dedicated their lives to their service. I tilted my head, keeping my eyes locked dead on hers. But they never called it emotionally starved. They called it leadership. The color drained out of Vanessa's perfectly powdered face, only to be instantly replaced by a hot, ugly red flush. Her primary weapon was snapped in half in front of an audience. She scrambled to save face, her voice pitching up nervously as she gripped her wine glass. "Well, I just mean, there is more to life than rank and files," she stammered. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the bitter black liquid. "There should be," I replied. My absolute calm suffocated her argument. I gave her nothing to fight against, no anger to feed off of. Defeated and humiliated, she turned on her heel and pushed her way into the crowd. If you have ever had your success belittled by toxic relatives who try to mask their own insecurities by calling you cold or lonely, hit the like button and subscribe right now. I know exactly how infuriating that is. Go down to the comments and simply type the word boundary. Let me know you are building your own fortress against people who try to drag you down. I stood there in the ambient light, the bitter taste of coffee lingering on my tongue. The psychological slaughter was just getting started. I was not going to stop at breaking Vanessa's fragile ego. I was going for the root. From the far side of the ballroom, a sharp metallic sound cut through the noise. Clink, clink, clink. Colonel Mercer was standing at the main head table. He held a silver fork, tapping it steadily against the side of a crystal champagne flute. The room began to quiet down. The old veteran scanned the crowd until his eyes locked onto me. He raised his hand, gesturing toward the stage. "Commander Watts." The colonel's gravelly voice echoed through the microphone. "Would you care to come up here and make a toast to the new family?" I lowered my coffee cup. My eyes bypassed the colonel and swept directly toward the center of the head table. Ben was sitting there, his face suddenly pale, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was entirely rigged with explosives. It was time to fire the heavy artillery. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of Colonel Mercer's silver fork hitting his crystal glass sliced through the low buzzing hum of the reception hall. Hundreds of faces turned toward the front. The chatter died off, replaced by the rustle of silk dresses and the squeak of leather shoes shifting on the polished floor. I stepped away from the high-top table. I left my coffee cup behind. I walked past the rows of white linen tables, my eyes fixed straight ahead. The harsh, brilliant glare of the spotlight hit my face as I approached the wooden podium. My pulse accelerated. It was the familiar, involuntary biological dump of adrenaline that happens the second before you step out from behind cover. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the metal shaft of the microphone. My palms were slick with cold sweat. The metal felt heavy, cold, slippery. I pulled it off the stand. A high-pitched screech of audio feedback blasted through the overhead speakers. It was a sharp, ugly noise, a warning shot. I stood there in the glaring light, letting the silence stretch out for 3 agonizing seconds. I did not smile. I did not look at the bride. I looked out into the crowd. "Thank you, Colonel," I said. My voice echoed off the high ceiling. It was completely steady but stripped of any fake warmth. People usually think that strength has to be loud. They think it looks like yelling or throwing your weight around to make someone else feel small. But the truth is, some of the absolute toughest people I have ever served with have been scared out of their minds at one point or another. Down at the main head table, the movement stopped. Ben had been halfway through a bite of cake. His fork hovered an inch from his mouth. The primal instinct of a guilty man told him the crosshairs were moving over his chest. I did not look at the ceiling. I did not look at the back wall. I swept my eyes across the crowd and locked them directly onto my brother sitting hunched next to his arrogant new wife. I tightened my grip on the microphone. I slowed my cadence down. Every word was a measured, calculated strike. "Years ago," I continued, "someone I cared about very much called me at 2 a.m. He was in an absolute blind panic. His business was completely nosediving. The bank had locked him out. He was out of options." A low wave of murmurs rippled through the back tables, aunts and uncles whispering behind their hands. Ben's throat went bone dry. I watched him swallow hard. He set his fork down and gripped the thick edge of the banquet table with both hands. His knuckles were white. Right next to him, Vanessa frowned. Her perfect eyebrows pulled together. She glanced sideways at her husband, confusion starting to crack her smug mask. "I helped," I said, my voice echoing like a judge reading a sentence in an empty courtroom. "Because that is what you are supposed to do when you see your own blood drowning in the water. You throw them a line. You do not just turn your back and let them sink to save yourself." I stopped talking. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It was a suffocating, crushing weight pressing down on the head table. It was a blade pressed right against Ben's throat. He knew exactly what I was talking about. A slick sheen of cold sweat broke out across his forehead, gleaming under the chandelier light. He looked physically sick, but the crowd did not have the whole picture yet. They knew there was a debt, but they had absolutely no idea how deep the hole was. They did not know the cost. The tension in the room was stretched so tight you could hear it humming in the air. Just as the silence reached its breaking point, movement caught the corner of my eye. Down in the front row, General Hale stood up. He did not rush. He did not say a word. The old Marine simply pushed his chair back, stood up to his full height, and took one single deliberate step forward, pulling himself out of the crowd and into the edge of the spotlight. He looked at me. Then he turned his massive head and locked his eyes on Ben. I did not have to play the role of the angry debt collector. The general was stepping in. He was taking the gavel. General Hale did not need a microphone. His voice was a weapon all on its own. It rolled through the reception hall like a shockwave, instantly killing whatever whispers were left. Son. The general barked, his dark eyes locked dead onto Ben. Did your sister help save your company or not? Ben physically shrank. The false swagger, the arrogant smirks, the loud, obnoxious laughter from the patio, it all evaporated. He dropped his head, unable to look the four-star general in the eye. He could not look at me either. Hundreds of eyes were drilling into him from every corner of the room. He was pinned. His Adam's apple bobbed hard. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, pathetic rasp came out. He cleared his throat. Yes, Ben whispered. Vanessa's head snapped toward her new husband. Her eyes were wide, manic. What? She shrieked, completely forgetting her polished Southern Belle routine. Helped with what? Ben's hands slid off the edge of the table. They hung uselessly at his sides. The absolute cowardice of the man was finally laid bare. He did not look at his wife. He stared blankly at his empty plate. Things were bad, Ben mumbled, his voice thick and shaky. The bank was calling in the loans. I was going under. I called Molly. She wired me $40,000. $40,000. The collective gasp from the crowd sucked the air right out of the room. The illusion was dead. The heavy, suffocating curtain of lies was ripped completely off the track. The blood money I earned and the dirt, the hazard pay I saved to buy my own freedom had been buried under this ridiculous spectacle. And the man who took it had sat back and let his new wife treat me like garbage. Vanessa fractured. The realization hit her that she had married a man drowning in debt, a man who survived solely on the charity of the sister she had spent the last 24 hours publicly humiliating. The sheer unadulterated embarrassment scrambled her brain. She panicked. She desperately clawed for the one tactic that always worked for her in the past: play the victim. Oh, I see. Vanessa spat, her voice shrill and trembling. Her face flushed a dark, angry red. She glared at me, her hands shaking as she grabbed the edge of the table. So, now I am the villain, is that it? You just wanted to humiliate us on our wedding day to make yourself look like a hero. I did not step back. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical pitch. I tightened my grip on the microphone. I looked directly into the eyes of the woman who had laughed at me from her blind spot just hours ago. You treat people you think are beneath you like dirt. I said, my voice cold and flat. Before you even take 5 seconds to figure out who they actually are. I paused. I let the silence hang for a beat. Take a look around, Vanessa, I said. Is anyone standing up to defend you right now? Dead silence. Vanessa whipped her head around. She looked at the bridesmaids sitting right next to her, the girls she had been gossiping with all morning. They averted their eyes. One of them actually shifted her chair a few inches away. Vanessa looked out at the tables of aunts and cousins. The same people who had chuckled at her cruel jokes earlier were now staring at her with blatant disgust. When the truth drops, parasites abandon the sinking ship. There was no lifeline left. No one was going to save her. The absolute crushing weight of public rejection broke her. Vanessa let out a sharp, ugly sob. She grabbed her expensive clutch purse off the table. She shoved her chair backward so hard it tipped over. The heavy wooden chair hit the carpet with a loud, violent thud. She turned and ran. She practically sprinted down the center aisle of the tent, pushing past a waiter carrying a tray of empty glasses. Her sharp stiletto heels hammered against the floorboards. She stepped blindly onto the white rose petals, scattered along the runner, crushing them into the fabric as she fled the room. Ben jerked upward, his hands gripping the table. Vanessa, wait, he croaked. He took half a step out from behind the table. Then he froze. His shoes felt like lead. He stood there completely exposed in the middle of the head table. He looked out at the sea of faces. Not a single person was looking at him with pity. They looked at him like he was a thief. The alpha male facade, the successful business owner act, it was all stripped away. He was nothing but a hollow shell of a man who stole from his sister and let his wife take the fall. He slowly sank back down into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I did not smile. I did not feel the sudden urge to cheer or pump my fist. The job was done. I set the microphone down on the wooden podium. The dull clack signaled the end of the operation. I turned to my right. General Hale was standing right there. He did not say a word. He reached out and clapped a heavy, calloused hand onto my shoulder. One firm squeeze, complete respect. I gave him a single nod. I turned my back on the head table. I kept my posture straight, my chin level. I walked down the steps of the podium and headed straight for the exit. The crowd parted. Aunts, uncles, and cousins stepped backward, clearing a wide path for me. No one whispered. No one tried to stop me. They moved out of the way like civilians watching a soldier walk out of a freshly cleared blast zone. I pushed through the heavy canvas flaps of the tent and stepped out into the cool, dark Charleston air. The ringing in my ears faded. 5:30 a.m. The military discipline that had kept me alive in combat zones for 12 years booted up. No hesitation. No lingering in the wreckage of the night before. I zipped my duffel bag shut. I pulled on a pair of stiff blue jeans and a heavy black sweater. At exactly 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Can we talk before you leave, Ben?" I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder and took the elevator down. The hotel lobby was completely dead. A flat gray pre-dawn light filtered through the large plate glass windows, stripping all the color out of the room. I spotted him sitting in the far corner. He was slumped deep into a leather armchair, looking like a deserter who had just surrendered his rifle. He wore the exact same clothes from the reception. The tie was gone. The collar was unbuttoned. I walked over. The rubber soles of my boots made no sound on the carpet. On the low glass table in front of him sat a black cardboard cup of coffee. No sugar, no cream. It was the only detail about me he had managed to remember correctly in the last 4 years. Right next to the coffee was a thick brown craft paper envelope. I sat down in the chair across from him. I did not lean forward. I kept my back straight against the upholstery. Ben pushed the envelope slowly across the glass. The rough paper made a dry scratching sound. He ran his hands over his face. When he looked at me, his eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with red. He looked completely broken. "I am so ashamed, Ben rasped using the childhood nickname I had not heard in a decade. His voice cracked. It was a pathetic, hollow sound. He swallowed hard, looking down at the heavy envelope. He was finally stripping off the last layer of his fake alpha male skin. "I was so ashamed of needing you that I let it turn into resentment. You saved me. You pulled my entire life out of the fire. But every time I looked at you, I did not feel grateful. I just felt like a massive failure." He stopped to take a shaky breath. The silence in the lobby pressed in on us. "I let Vanessa say those things." Ben whispered, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear him over the hum of the lobby refrigerator. "I let her talk down to you because it made me feel bigger. It soothed my ego." There it was. The absolute ugly truth lying naked on the glass table. He was not stupid. He had not forgotten what I did for him. He was just a coward. He hated me not because I did anything wrong, but because my simple existence exposed exactly how weak he really was. He used my hazard pay to keep a roof over his head, and then he used my dignity as a chew toy to keep his new wife happy. I looked down at the thick craft envelope. It was $40,000. Cash or a cashier's check, it did not matter. I reached out and pulled the envelope toward me. The rough paper scraped against my calloused fingertips. My expression did not change. I did not feel a sudden rush of forgiveness. I did not feel anger. I felt absolutely nothing but the freezing cold clarity of someone drawing a permanent line in the sand. "This does not fix it, Ben," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. It did not rise. It hit the air like a hammer striking an anvil. Ben flinched. He looked up at me, desperate for absolution. "I am not going back to being the punching bag this family uses to feel better about themselves." I continued, keeping my eyes locked dead on his. "And I am never going to sit quietly and let someone talk down to me just because the truth makes them uncomfortable." He slowly nodded his head. It was an unconditional surrender. He knew the bridge was not just burned, it was completely vaporized. He had bought back his debt, but he had permanently lost his sister. I stood up. I grabbed the coffee cup and the envelope in one hand, my duffel bag in the other. We walked out through the sliding glass doors into the parking lot. The air was biting cold. A thick, wet morning fog rolled off the harbor, clinging to the asphalt. My rental car was parked 3 spots away. Ben stopped near the bumper. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets. His eyes were wet. "I am going to miss you," he said, his voice thick. He hesitated, looking at his shoes. "Call me, before the next crisis, not just when you need something." I stopped. I looked at the man I had practically raised, the man I had bled for. I stepped forward and wrapped my free arm around his shoulders. It was a brief, stiff embrace, polite, mechanical. There was absolutely no warmth left in it. It was not a hug to welcome him back. It was the physical closing of a door. I pulled away. I did not say goodbye. I turned my back to him, opened the door of the rental car, and threw my duffel bag onto the passenger seat. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a solid, rusty clank, sealing off the outside noise. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, shaking the cold frame of the car. I put it in drive and hit the gas. I did not look in the rearview mirror. The commercial jet engine spooled up with a deafening mechanical roar. The heavy vibration rattled through the floorboards, traveling straight up through the soles of my boots. I leaned my head back against the stiff fabric of the window seat. I watched the Charleston harbor fall away beneath us. The sprawling waterfront, the historic mansions, the sprawling white canvas tents on the manicured lawns. They all shrank down into meaningless little dots before being completely swallowed by a thick, heavy blanket of gray morning clouds. I turned my head away from the cold glass. The man sitting in the aisle seat next to me was asleep. He was older, maybe late 60s. His face was weathered, lined with deep creases like dried leather left out in the sun. He wore a faded olive drab jacket. Stitched right above the left breast pocket was a frayed, faded patch. Vietnam veteran. His large, scarred hands rested quietly on his lap. A strange, silent sense of connection settled into my chest. I did not need to wake him up. I did not need to ask him about his deployments. Soldiers carry a very specific kind of silence. We carry memories that weigh a ton. We carry scars that civilians will absolutely never understand. We spend our lives bleeding in the dirt to protect a society that complains about cold coffee and bad traffic. And sometimes the hardest reality to swallow is that the people waiting for us back home are the ones who appreciate that sacrifice the least. I close my eyes. The low, steady hum of the pressurized cabin filled my ears, drowning out the ambient noise of the other passengers. Age does not make people better. It does not bring maturity or wisdom. It just slowly burns away the polite filters, exposing the ugly, selfish things people try to hide when they are young. For 34 years, I craved the basic fundamental understanding of my own family. I wanted them to understand the sleepless nights, the bone-crushing weight of command, the split-second bloody decisions I had to make so other mothers' sons could go home to their families. But the cold, hard truth was staring me right in the face. They did not want to understand. Understanding my sacrifice meant they would have to acknowledge their own profound cowardice. And I finally realized something as the plane banked hard to the north. I did not need them to understand anymore. I did not need their permission to be proud of who I am. I only demanded the absolute baseline of human respect. When they refused to hand it over, I simply reached out and took it back by force. Last night was not a tragedy. It was a surgical extraction. I had spent decades dragging around the toxic weight of my parents' indifference, Ben's pathetic insecurities, and Vanessa's empty, venomous vanity. I let them use my guilt as a weapon. I let them drain my bank account to buy their own comfort. $40,000. That was the ransom I paid to realize my family was entirely bankrupt in every single way that actually mattered. They took my money to keep up appearances, but they could never buy genuine character. Sitting here thousands of feet in the air, my chest felt completely hollow. It was a good hollow. The kind of lightness you feel after a surgeon cuts a malignant, heavy tumor right out of your body. I reached up. My index finger brushed against the thick, raised scar tissue running across my collarbone. Vanessa saw a flaw to mock. Ben saw something to ignore. My mother saw an inconvenience. But they were dead wrong. These scars are not signs of a broken, lonely woman. They are not marks of weakness or a lack of emotional warmth. They are the heavy, permanent medals of a survivor. They are absolute proof that when the world caught fire, I did not run away. I walked right into the flames. From this moment forward, Commander Molly Watts does not shrink herself to fit into anyone else's narrow, fragile comfort zone. The plane hit a rough patch of turbulence, shaking the cabin violently for a few seconds. Then the nose pitched up, and we broke completely through the dense gray cloud cover. Blinding, absolute white sunlight flooded through the small plexiglass window. It washed over my face, carrying a sudden, sharp heat. The storm was entirely beneath us now. There was nothing but clear, endless blue sky ahead. Sometimes the absolute greatest victory you will ever achieve in this life is not destroying your enemies. It is simply walking away. It is looking at the people who use you, the people who disrespect you, the people who try to make you feel small, and permanently locking the door behind them. If you have stayed with me until the very end of this flight, I know exactly why you are here. You carry your own scars. You have a Ben or a Vanessa in your life. You have given your blood, your money, and your sanity to people who share your last name, only to have them spit in your face when you ask for basic decency. You are not crazy. You are not the villain, and you are absolutely not alone. Do not ever let a coward convince you that your strength is a character flaw. Do not let people who have never built a single thing in their lives tear down the fortress you constructed with your own bare hands. Stop setting yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Stand up. Square your shoulders. Walk out of their tent and never look back. Thank you for listening to my story. Please leave a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel for more content. I appreciate your support, and I will see you next time.